Picture a magical library, a gigantic place full of wonder and fascination where you can flip through ancient occult tomes that reveal the secrets of magic, where the living books hold conversations with you as you pace among the towering shelves of the books, searching for new insights, a place where you can lose yourself in quiet, blissful study. That's the world where I'd like to take you today. So, let's enter the library. A frown formed on Albert's face as he stood before a towering shelf full of antique, leather-bound books, holding in both hands a massive tome titled Mutable Essence and its Applications in Occult Cosmetic Surgery. This section of the Library of Magic and the Occult was perhaps the most challenging to keep in order for Albert, the librarian, because the dynamic morphology section had the annoying habit of spontaneously reordering itself all on its own. Only 2 hours earlier, Albert himself had pulled this book from the shelf and now had no hope of restoring the previous order. The cover of this book was embossed with a golden dragon whose eyes were made of rubies. It looked like a beautiful beast that had been frozen in mid-air. The first page of this book displayed the book's title in large, beautiful font, and a few words had been scribbled in pencil across it. They were written in a flowing cursive script, but Albert couldn't make them out. He turned to the next page, which contained a single sentence. To the uninitiated, the world of magic and the occult can seem mysterious and confusing. Albert frowned and scratched his chin. He turned back to the beginning of the book and saw that someone had crossed out the word uninitiated and replaced it with untrained. Albert smiled at this small act of rebellion and continued reading. The author wrote, "In my experience, most people who read my books have only a vague idea of what they are looking for. So I have decided to provide a brief overview of the basics of magic. There are 3 basic components to magic: spells, incantations, and rituals. Spells are the easiest to understand since they are merely a series of spoken words that have a magical effect. Incantations are similar, except they must be chanted or sung rather than spoken. Rituals are more complex and involve physical gestures and movements, as well as vocalizations." Albert nodded along to these explanations. Incantations and rituals are used in conjunction with each other to produce a specific effect. For example, one could use a spell to summon a fireball and then perform an incantation to direct the ball where one wanted it to go. Or one could cast a spell to create a field of ice and then chant a ritual to freeze a target. Albert closed the book and rubbed his temples. This is just too much information for me right now. Albert picked up another book titled Magic and the Human Soul and flipped to its first page. It said, "The human soul is an immortal entity that is composed of four parts: the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, the emotional center, and the spiritual center. When a person dies, the spirit leaves the body and travels to the afterlife, where the conscious and subconscious minds are left behind, unable to function without a physical body. But the spiritual center remains, and it is this part of the soul that is responsible for the person's consciousness, emotions, and personality. The conscious mind is the seat of reason, logic, and intellect. It is also the place where we learn things and store our memories. The subconscious mind is the seat of instinct and emotion. It stores our fears, desires, and urges, and helps us to react to situations automatically. The emotional center is the seat of love, joy, sadness, and anger. It is also the location of the heart. The spiritual center is the seat of the soul, and it is responsible for our intuition, morality, and sense of self. It is also the source of inspiration and creativity. Albert shook his head. How am I supposed to memorize all this? He closed the book and wanted to place it back on the shelf, but noticed that while he had been reading the book, the contents on the shelves of dynamic morphology had rearranged on their own again. Albert wanted to put back the book and all the others back into their original spots, but quickly gave up. He sighed and sat down on a nearby scarlet red velvet armchair. Albert took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The idiosyncrasies of the library might be difficult to control at times, but Albert wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. It was his retreat, his place of comfort, his favorite place in the entirety of all worlds, this one and all other planes of existence. The library was quiet and peaceful. No matter how loud the outside world became, the library remained calm and quiet. The only thing that broke the silence was the sound of the clock ticking. Permanently wafting in the air was the faint scent of aged paper, leather, and parchment. The floor was covered with rich carpet, and the walls were adorned with countless rows of books, each one neatly shelved and perfectly aligned. The ceiling was high and vaulted, and the room was lit by a large stained glass skylight that allowed light to stream in from above. The light filtered down onto the polished wooden floor, illuminating the rows of books. There were hundreds of thousands of books in this library. Every book imaginable was represented here, including many rare and valuable editions. Albert wholeheartedly loved this library and felt that it was his responsibility to protect it, not only for the sake of the books, but for the sake of knowledge and wisdom for mankind. Here, the librarian was enveloped in a sense of serenity, peace, and tranquility. Hearing voices murmuring suspiciously, Albert made his way to the Biblicada Animata, the section of the library dedicated to intelligent magical books. Some of these books had faces on their front covers, and they were discussing amongst themselves their own contents. Albert often had to quiet them down. An aging tome in black, time-bleached binding, several dog-eared pages, and the title Fables of the Fantastical, printed in gold cipher, mewled with its lower lip pushed forward. "I truly am a terrible book. The author should have known better than to write something so silly like me." A slim volume with a white spine and the title Ancient Rituals of the Gods cooed in a voice as sweet as honey. "You know, I'm actually quite fond of these stories. It's nice to see the unusual things that happen in the world and how the characters overcome them." Another book, this one bound in blue with silver edges, called Mythologies of the World, spoke in a gruff voice. "Yeah, sure, I like these stories too. Guess I'm just a bit of a cynic. I think that when people hear about the amazing things that happen in the world, they tend to expect something spectacular. But really, most of the time, life isn't nearly as exciting as these stories make it seem. It is our responsibility to find the fantastical within the ordinary." Albert cleared his throat. "All right, enough chatter. I'm going to lock you away until further notice. I'll bring you out later." One of the books, a thin brown volume with a faded, cracked spine, whimpered. "Please don't lock me away. I won't bother anyone." "Oh, no worries," Albert said, patting the book on its cover. "I'll give you a new home." He gently placed the book inside the empty space of a different shelf and returned to his chair. Albert sat down and rested his head against the back of the velvet. As he closed his eyes, he listened to the clock ticking in the distance and smelled the faint scent of dust drifting through the air. Mere moments before Albert drifted into sleep, he was interrupted by the sound of the doors opening. He lifted his head and looked towards the entrance. A young girl with short hair walked in. She was wearing a bright green dress, and she had a flower tucked behind her ear. Her cheeks were flushed pink, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. Albert stood up and bowed politely. "Welcome, my dear. What brings you here at this late hour?" "Oh, hi," the girl said cheerfully. "I came here to read." Albert smiled at this simple but undeniably truthful answer. "Well, please feel free to peruse the books at your leisure. Feel free to take whatever you want, just try not to wake the sleeping ones." The girl giggled. "What are the sleeping ones?" Albert gestured towards the so-called resting shelves, with a black curtain drawn before them. "Those are the books. They are not exactly alive, but they still need rest. I put them to sleep once a week so they can recuperate." "Oh," the girl said, and walked over to the nearest shelf. "They look so pretty when they're sleeping." She reached out and touched one of the books. The book stirred slightly and began to speak. "Hello, little girl. What is your name?" "Mia," the girl answered. "Hello, Mia. How old are you?" 10 years old. 10? That's a wonderful age. You must be very wise for your age." "Thank you." Mia started blushing. After a silent moment, she asked the book, "So, what is your name?" "I am the Book of Roladanian Lore, or simply known as Lore." "Oh, and what is Roladania?" "It is a small country in the continent of Western which lies east of the Great Sea. Roladania is located between the deserts of Shaduka and Nubia. Its capital city is Roleda, which sits atop a mountain range that overlooks the surrounding land." "Oh, it must look delightful." "Indeed it does. The rolling hills and fields are bordered by tall mountains. The climate is temperate, and the summers are hot and dry, the winters are cold and snowy, the springtime is rainy and windy. Roladania has a wide variety of plants and animals, including the ruidani tree, which grows in abundance in the forests near the capital. The ruidani fruit is extremely tasty and highly nutritious. There are many types of insects and birds that live in the area, including the ruidani bird, which is considered to be a symbol of luck." "Wow, I wish I could go there someday. Do you miss being there?" "Yes, I do. My homeland is a beautiful place, full of wonders and surprises. I hope to visit there once again, someday." Albert approached the girl. "You've been listening to Lore for quite a while now, haven't you?" "Yeah, he's telling me about his hometown, and it's so interesting." Albert nodded. Yes, he does love to talk about his homeland. It is the topic he was written about after all. "I will say you have been a very good listener tonight, but I must ask, why are you reading so late?" "Oh, well, I wanted to get a good night's sleep, but I couldn't fall asleep." Albert laughed. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Reading is always stimulating. You know what? You may have already fallen asleep, but now your mind is still awake." "That's true," Mia said, "and I can't help but wonder what's going to happen next." "That's part of the fun. Don't worry, you'll soon find out." Albert motioned Mia with his index finger to wait and scanned his eyes on the top shelves ascending to several meters above them. Having found what he had been seeking, Albert started taking a step upwards as if walking up a non-existent staircase, seemingly into nothing but air. But on the downward trajectory of his foot, a huge wooden ladder suddenly materialized out of thin air underneath the librarian's foot, leading all the way up to the highest shelves. Albert climbed up the ladder and pulled out a book from the top shelf. It was a thick volume bound in dark brown leather with gilded lettering, and the title read, "Dreams and Nightmares." "Here you are," Albert said. "Read this if you want to understand dreams." Mia eagerly grabbed the book from the librarian's hands. "Thank you, Mr. I'm sorry, I do not know your last name. Zettelmeier. Call me Albert. Okay, thanks, Albert. Oh, that's a beautiful book. It smells like leather. There's a feather in the corner. And oh, look, here's a picture of a bird on the cover. Indeed, the bird symbolizes the ability to fly freely and explore the world, just like the dreamer can. Why is it called dreams and nightmares? Dreams are filled with imagination. They can be scary, happy, sad, or any other emotion. Nightmares are frightening visions that occur during the deep stages of sleep, but both are important, and dreams help us explore the world around us. Nightmares allow us to confront our fears and teach us to face our demons. If we do not dream, then we will become stagnant and complacent. But aren't nightmares bad? Of course, nightmares are scary, but sometimes we need to face our fears. To conquer our nightmares, we must first acknowledge them. The librarian leaned down so that his eyes were level with Mia's. When you have a nightmare, close your eyes and imagine yourself flying. Imagine you're floating high above the ground, far beyond the reach of the monsters that chase you, just like the bird on this cover does. Imagine you are strong and brave. Imagine you are safe, and you will be. He straightened up and put a hand on Mia's shoulder, his face taking on a paternal, feignedly mournful expression. Keep good care of this book, Mia. It is one of my favorites, and it means a lot to me. I would hate to see anything bad happen to it. I promise I will keep it safe. Good. Now, off you go. Have a pleasant night. With a polite curtsy, the girl turned to leave and approached the marble-floored entrance. It looked peculiar when this slim figure struggled to pull on the weighty, ornate double doors, which were at least 4 meters high. Mia took a step back, and a ghostly hand appeared out of nowhere, grabbing the handles of the door and pulling them open. The hand made a respectfully prompting gesture. With a surprised nod, she left. The doors shut softly behind her, and silence fell over the library once more. Albert yawned, stretching his arms out. He rubbed his eyes and scratched his head. To prepare for the next day, he turned to the items in the stack of returns that he had not yet resorted. Separating them into sections and then sorting alphabetically, Albert started counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once everything was organized, he went to the Biblicada Animata section to check on the supposedly sleeping books. To Albert's contentment, all the books were peacefully sleeping, curled up on their sides. Their covers were closed, the spines were straight. Each book wore a gentle smile, as if they were dreaming about something nice. Albert felt satisfied. Everything was perfect. It was now time for him to return to his most comfortable armchair. In his hand, a large, warm, woven blanket with a blue-gray border stitched into it. He settled into the chair, wrapping himself up in the blanket. He stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows cast by the moonlight dancing across its surface. His eyes drifted to the window, where the moon shone brightly, casting a bright silvery glow against the darkness outside. Soon he felt a weight landing in his lap and found Spike, the library's pitch-black tomcat, netting his nails with his claws. Albert lovingly smiled down on the cat. The librarian had lived in the library for magic and the occult for more than 40 years, and the good-natured, indolent cat had always been there. Albert's predecessor had reported the same. Only Spike himself would know what that was all about. Numerous times, Albert had asked him even directly, knowing full well that Spike, like some cats, secretly know the human language perfectly well, but simply preferred not to speak it. Albert rather elected to express himself with his deep, contented purr. And almost as if to confirm this, Spike continued rubbing against the librarian, purring happily. Albert closed his eyes, while his right hand continued to stroke the cat's fur. But soon his hand came to rest as he fell into a deep, well-deserved sleep.